Hello. Oh my goodness. Look who it freaking is. Back on the internet again. So today I wanted to talk about comic books, specifically this comic book, which I read and I had so many thoughts about because for the last year I've been working in mental health, and this is DC trying to say some things about mental health when it comes to superheroes. I will say it is pretty funny that comic book writers had to come up with a mental health system, but it definitely makes sense that they're the ones who would be able to tell how a superhero like Batman or Superman would go about creating a mental health care system. So, in a way, the comic book writers were perfectly placed to make a system that is flawed in all the ways that that character's idea of this system would be flawed. I was actually surprised when I read this to see how they took on that task with such grace, in that they were able to make the story about the very blind spots that those superheroes would have. Part of me did wish that they would have been able to do sort of the opposite and give these heroes an actually good mental health care system. So that's why there are two things I want to talk about today. First, what is the really legitimate critique that the comic book writers were able to make about the values of these superheroes through the mental health system that they created? And two, what ideas exist in our world that could help us imagine a way that superheroes could have actually useful and good mental health care? So first of all, in case you haven't read Heroes in Crisis actually starts with everyone, seemingly, at the Sanctuary, which is the mental health care facility created by the Justice League for heroes, being massacred, except for two people, apparently. And so then the story sort of follows the Justice League trying to find those two people and get them to tell them what happened, but it turns out neither of those two are the ones that actually killed everyone. So I guess spoiler, if you want to go read the comic first, now is the time. But it turns out that somebody else at the facility who has much cooler superpowers than the two suspects basically had a breakdown of some sort, a mental break, if you will. And because he was so awesomely superpowered, he accidentally killed everyone in the facility, but then he also used his superpowers to cover up the fact that he was the one that killed them all, and in a way ended up, trigger warning, killing himself using time travel shenanigans. So like a future version, or he went and killed like the future version of himself, some nonsense like that. But so the story is following that mystery alongside showing us what it was actually like in the Sanctuary, where all of these heroes were getting help for mostly like PTSD, essentially. Although there's some other things sprinkled in there. One of the main suspects was Harley Quinn, who's one of my faves, and I think it's really interesting because she has a perspective of a history working in an asylum as a psychologist or psychiatrist, and she actually manages to change the way the Sanctuary is supposed to work to make it actually more effective for herself. Because one of the main things that we see about the Sanctuary is that it really, really prioritizes privacy and confidentiality. These heroes are getting help without interacting with any other human beings. They're getting help from a computer, and they're enabled to encounter no other people while they're in the Sanctuary, so that nobody has to know that they're there. Which sounds good, because from their perspective, they have to value privacy just like they value secret identities, or at least a decent amount of the heroes in DC do value secret identities, because they don't want enemies to be able to hurt their loved ones if any sensitive information about their identity, or even them being at the Sanctuary, were to be made public knowledge, or even just accessed by one person. So it makes sense for the superheroes to really care about privacy. But we see that within the Sanctuary, this value of privacy actually looks a lot more like a punishment of isolation. So a lot of the people in there aren't interacting with anyone, and they're really just ruminating in those negative places because the computer system can only do so much to help them. There's an element missing to that, which I'm going to talk about in the second part, which is that you really need human connection, and human relationships are the main driving force behind healing any sort of mental health challenges. There's another value that's revealed throughout, another reason that heroes not only keep their information private, but also don't talk about using the sanctuary amongst themselves. And that's that they're all really worried about public perception, including the perception of their teammates within the Justice League or the superhero community. These heroes all see themselves as a symbol of hope, and they really want to maintain the ability for other people to trust in them to be able to do things like save the world. And they believe that if people know that they're struggling in these ways, they'll lose that trust and no longer be able to effectively be superheroes. So they're worried about any sort of knowledge within the community or outside the community that they're using the sanctuary because they think it might stop the world from being able to have heroes if those heroes admit to not being perfect. So this is like a really interesting story that shows us those couple of things about these heroes, that there are really good reasons that they made the system the way that they did, even though those same good reasons is exactly what doomed the system to have this sort of catastrophe inevitably happen, because they're putting people with extraordinary abilities into a situation where they're not able to effectively heal because of those blind spots built into those values. So the interesting thing that Harley Quinn does is that she isn't alone in the sanctuary. She spends basically all of her time in there alongside Poison Ivy. A big part of the healing is that the superheroes or the individuals go into these rooms where they can run simulations. It seems like it's mainly supposed to be a sort of exposure therapy, allow them to work through things that happened by confronting it, and then also being able to maybe act it out differently to give themselves resolution for any sort of regret or guilt they have tied up in what did happen in reality. So most people are in these simulations alone, and we see some of them just sort of going through it over and over in a way that seems more like torture maybe than actual healing, which makes sense because when the person who's struggling is the one making decisions about how to heal, their distorted thoughts are not going to be able to make the right decisions a lot of the time. Whereas Poison Ivy and Harley Quinn being together, they're able to challenge each other. So when Harley maybe voices something that's coming from a sort of unhealthy or distorted thinking type of place, Ivy is able to push back against that and encourage her to do something different that is more useful for her to actually work through everything that she's feeling. And so we really see that dynamic contrasted with what happens with the true person who killed everyone in the sanctuary, which is Wally West, the Flash, one of the Flashes, the second Flash. I don't know that much about the Flash, but he is dealing with things alone, and so he gets to a place of paranoia where he thinks nobody else is even in the sanctuary, and it's almost like a prison just holding him in. And that extreme paranoia is something that was inevitably going to happen to somebody when they're going through this situation legitimately alone. So at the end of it, when the heroes figure out that Wally the Flash actually killed everyone, including himself, and they stop blaming Harley and the other suspect, who, I'll be honest, I did not care that much about, it seems like the hero community is able to actually learn a little bit from the mistakes they made in setting up the sanctuary. And I think the biggest thing that it seems like they will be able to take away from it is that within themselves, within the community of heroes of the Justice League, they should be open about the things that they're dealing with to some extent. And this is really shown in the art throughout the comic, because just scattered throughout there are pages and pages and pages of what seems like excerpts from like intake type interviews, like the things that all these different heroes, like pretty much everyone in the Justice League, associated with the Justice League, just tons of heroes, what they've said to the computer system at the sanctuary when they first got there. And it shows us that truly every one of them is going through something, and yet they all believe that nobody else is going through it at all. That idea that the system they created makes that idea make a lot of sense, makes it a reasonable belief for them to have, is what led to this inevitable catastrophe. So the way the story built up that critique, it made it seem like hopefully they've learned to at least talk to each other about these things being real and happening. Gives me hope that this comic actually had a pretty good message in the end, even if the specific system of mental health it showed was very flawed. They very much acknowledged its flaws. I am going to throw in, for some spice here, just my absolute favorite part of seeing all of these different heroes in their like little intake interviews was all of the Bat family. They are my fave in DC. I pretty much read specific Bat family type stuff. And so their like intake interview screenshots of all of them are so funny because they're all talking about each other in such different ways. Like Nightwing is like, everyone else has a personality. Jason's cool. Tim's dark and smart. Damien's cute. Everyone knows that. But then the others are saying the same things about him and that they're the ones that are like useless or nothing. Like both Red Robin and Nightwing say, but what the hell am I? After listing how everyone else has a whole distinct thing going on. Oh, also Jason also says, what the hell am I? But then some of the other ones are funny because they don't mention that, but it kind of builds on that. Like Damien's like, I'm fine. What did everyone else say? Just like fully in denial. Orphan is just like glaring at the camera, perfectly in character. It says so much. Spoiler is like, I bet they all forgot about me. And she's right. This is exactly what they're talking about the whole time, is that like everyone is going through shit and yet none of them are talking to each other about it because they're so worried about not being trusted as a hero if they're open about these things. But I think this story is the first step in destigmatizing heroes needing mental health treatment. And so now I would like to propose my own ideas for how they could take inspiration from other mental health systems and things that truly exist and make a more effective system. So one of the problems is, obviously, in the real world we don't have superheroes, so there's nothing that we have had actual professionals actually have to develop. But I think there's like two key areas or key examples that superheroes could learn from. The first is veterans. So veterans have a lot of the same kind of mental health challenges that I think superheroes would have, in that PTSD is going to be the largest issue that they're struggling with, while also acknowledging that a lot of them have other comorbid or even unrelated concerns interacting with that need to process very specific, very intense traumas. And I think the thing that the DC superhero community should take away from how veteran mental health care is addressed is the value of group therapy, guided groups, as well as just general community and resources that allow them to come together in a context where they're not focused on treatment and talking about their trauma, but where it's acknowledged that everyone is healing from those things. Because one of the key things in healing mental illness is that the person needs to decide for themselves to pursue that healing journey. They have to be able to go through a lot of ups and downs and keep choosing to move forward with healing rather than accepting hopelessness or just never being able to feel better. And one of the best ways to help people feel motivated and feel able to continue persevering is by having community, by having a support system that shows you that others are also making those choices, as well as having people around you who are going to pick you up when you fall really hard down during that journey. And also just being in a space where you feel understood can help your mind to recognize that you don't have to be alone and isolated in the way that the sanctuary made them. The second situation that I think the heroes should draw inspiration from is that celebrities in our world do have to get mental health care And they also care a lot about privacy and confidentiality. So a couple key things to take away there is that in our world, we have HIPAA, which protects celebrities from having their therapists go tell all about what they've disclosed within therapy. So there's protection for them being able to talk openly without worrying about that information getting shared. I think DC comic superheroes, though, could have a slightly more superhero comic-esque way of ensuring this protection. So rather than having a law, because let's be honest, most superhero books would not consider a law good enough deterrent for a therapist. Superheroes have buds, bros in the Justice League. They can do like magic, so they could probably come up with some way to, with consent, magically bind anyone who's going to be a therapist or a treatment provider within the superhero community so that they would be unable to disclose that information. My inspiration for this comes from an actual storyline in the Batman world. Specifically, I read it in Gotham City Sirens, where we find out that Catwoman has had Talia al Ghul manipulate her mind so that she cannot be coerced to share Batman's identity with anyone. So there's a precedent that that sort of thing is possible, and that would definitely make superheroes feel like they're able to openly share and build a relationship with a therapist, because a lot of research has shown that that relationship with your therapist is the most important part of mental health care, rather than like what specific therapy you're doing with them. So being able to have that trust with another human being would be a lot better for their ability to heal than a computer system that is not able to really demonstrate empathy or connect in the way that two people could. Or aliens, since DC has a lot of alien going on, but really just the ability to have a connection on the basis of emotion and all those things that the computer-based program of the Sanctuary was not able to give. There's a whole other conversation that can open up about mental health care and AI, but I'm not here to have that conversation. And then the other thing I think is really important from the celebrity example is that concern about public perception and the public not trusting superheroes if they know that they're having these struggles is that actually I think a lot of celebrities being more open about what they're going through with mental health care has helped to destigmatize mental health care in general, and has actually really helped a lot of people who are seeking those same services to not be sort of villainized within their normal life. So I think a lot of people would see them as more of heroes for being open. The example I'm thinking of here, and there's a lot of other factors at play here, obviously, is like John Mulaney has been very open about going to rehab and that experience. And while he has gotten some backlash, surely, it is not nearly at the level of like what Lindsay Lohan got in the earlier 2000s when she was going to rehab. There's obviously also misogyny at play in that comparison, but I think that over time, other celebrities being able to speak a little bit and a little bit more openly about these things has made it more normalized for both celebrities and normal people. And I think that within the DC universe, these superheroes could definitely have that impact. I would love to see them use these suggestions to create a good mental health care system, and then also slowly be more open with the broader public that that is a system that exists, that superheroes are using, and that they do support other heroes using. In sum, this whole comic book limited series was super cool because it was able to make really good and effective arguments about why Batman, Superman would not be able to make a very good mental health care system. And it also started to open up the possibility that the heroes need to come up with something else, and especially need to be more open with each other about what they're going through. And I hope you enjoyed my suggestions for what I wish they would be able to create after what happened at the sanctuary. If you enjoyed it, I would love it if you would subscribe. I have been very into comic books this year, and I want to talk more about them, so we'll see if I'm able to keep this up. This channel has been, if you've been around, pretty dead since I finished college and my channel stopped being all about being in college. But I think this is finally something that I really want to talk about and I want to keep talking about. So I'm gonna give it my best shot, but no promises, y'all. Yeah, go to therapy.